Danny Einstein, not only a good friend, but he shared with me that if I was to attend, I would find a group of professionals that would be able to answer a lot of my questions and offer me advice. And so that was the beginning of my journey with FIAAA. I firmly believe that every athletic administrator in the state of Florida should be actively engaged with this organization, not because of the years that I spent with the organization, but because what FIAAA did for me professionally in the early years of my career as an athletic administrator, but what it did throughout my career. Being able to turn to your colleagues, not just in your county or neighboring counties, but throughout the state of Florida. You could you can put out an email to colleagues with a particular question, something that you're dealing with, and ask for feedback. And within an hour's time, you could have 20 or 30 responses that help you in making your decision based on what others are experiencing. So that's why FIAAA is so important to athletic administrators in the state of Florida, as are all state athletic administrator associations. And that, of course, feeds into the umbrella agency, the NIAAA. But, working within FIAAA and becoming part of the leadership over the years was not only invaluable, but it was extremely rewarding. And I enjoyed it tremendously. I have a great deal of respect for the organization, to say the least.
Now, again, my FIAAA story, I got involved later in my career. I was a head football coach and an athletic director, probably in that order. I think I did an okay job as an AD, but long story short, one of your colleagues, Dan Como, reached out to me. I attended my first FIAAA conference, and I was just hooked. I totally drank the Kool-Aid. And I know you and Dan have taught LTI courses over the years together. What sort of impact do you see those LTI courses and just the whole FIAAA conference experience having for, let's say, a young or a newer athletic director?
Frankly, I don't know how a young man or a young woman that is in athletic administration can truly function at a professional level unless they have that interaction with fellow professionals within the state of Florida in this case. By going to conference, listening to the experts that are brought in, as well as interacting with your colleagues just in a social setting, it takes the visor off. It gives you an opportunity to express yourself, to find out how others are doing their job. Because no matter how good of a job we think we're doing, there's always room for improvement. And I'm reminded of a presentation that Dan Como made. Uh, what was interesting is he had a brochure, and it was a brochure that dealt with dealing with parents. When he was finished with his presentation, I went up to him and I said, I always like to ask, would you have a problem if I duplicated your pamphlet? Because it's just really that good. And with the typical Dan Como smile, he said, I'd be honored if you would. That's why I'm doing what I'm doing to share. He says, because honestly, the idea that brought about this pamphlet, I got from another one of our colleagues. So by all means, I fine tuned it. You'll fine tune it. I went back to my high school. It became part of everything that we did at Sebastian River High School. These ideas that you bring back from conference are invaluable.
Right. And that's just another great example. And there's hundreds, there's thousands of athletic directors stealing, with my air quotes, stealing ideas from other ADs. Coaches, they try to keep things secret. They don't want to share, but ADs, they can't wait to give away, those great ideas. And again, I can see Dan as if he was with us on the podcast doing exactly that. Great stuff. Okay. We're going to do this at the end of the podcast, but if one of our listeners wanted to reach out maybe shoot you an email and connect, pick your brain a little bit. And listeners, you've got a master athletic administrator here. What would be the best way they could get a hold of you?
The best way would be to email me, and whenever you want me to, I'll give you my email address.
Let's go and do it now. And then again, we'll do it at the end of the podcast. But what is that email?
Okay. It's gladwin54@gmail.com. And I'm going to spell Gladwin for you. G is in golf, L is in Lima, A is in alpha, D is in Delta, W is in whiskey, Y is in Yankee, N is in November, E is in Echo, 54@gmail.
All right. And again, we'll give that out at the end of the podcast. But listeners, you got a great resource here, a Hall of Fame athletic director and LTI instructor. So we're going to take another break. I know for our regular listeners, that's shocking, but we're coming back with some more best practices on the Educational AD podcast. We want to thank our good friends at Sideline Interactive indoor score tables and video boards. Go to sidelineinteractive.com. Schedule a live web demo and see their scoreboards and their score tables in action. Probably one of the best purchases I ever made was our Sideline Interactive indoor score table. We, of course, use it for home games, but we also use it for pep rallies, for signing ceremonies. It's tremendously versatile, and the customer service is just outstanding. Once again, go to sidelineinteractive.com. Check out their products today. We also want to thank our friends at Home Campus. Home Campus is the exclusive high school and state association management platform for us. It's also your one-stop platform for things like schedules, student athlete eligibility and clearance, coaches paperwork, and a whole lot more. As an athletic director, I used Home Campus every single day, and it was just great, and you'll love it too. To get started, all you need to do is go to homecampus.com. That's homecampus.com. Hey, welcome back, everyone, to the Educational AD podcast. Michael, one of the things we try to do with this podcast is the idea of sharing best practices. So I'm going to put you on the spot. What are some things that you did as an athletic director at your school, or maybe they were things you saw other athletic directors do that you were going to put into practice that you would consider best practices that you can share with our listeners now?
Well, I think it's very important, if your school doesn't have one or has one that is incomplete, is to have a solid athletic handbook. Use it as the Bible for your department. It will outline things like the coaching responsibilities, the responsibilities of student athletes. It is much easier to go into a meeting with parents and your administration and have a book that you can refer to and say, here is our roadmap. These are our rules. These are our regulations. Every student athlete should receive one in the beginning of their respective season each year, whether they're a freshman or whether they're a senior. They should know what's in their athletic handbook, as should parents. So with that in mind, I think it's important to have those meetings at the beginning of each sports season with parents. Let them understand that your office is open, that we may not always agree on things, but the one thing that you're going to do as an athletic administrator is always refer to the athletic handbook. That, I think, eliminates a lot of problems, because from the very beginning of the sports season, student, the parent, the coach knows what the expectations are, and it should be very easy to have fun in your respective sport and at the same time know the rules and regulations of your school. I think it's important that athletic administrators have a coaching evaluation tool in place, a written document that at the end of each season, you meet with your head coach, you talk about what went well, what didn't go well, and where you can improve, where the coach can improve, and make it friendly. Not here's your report card, but here's how we can make your program better, make our athletic department better, make our school better. I think that it's important to have some things that are in the file that you can always reference. And sometimes you have to reference those files if it's necessary to make a coaching change. The other thing that I think is very important, very valuable, is to look within your school district at your three most senior, successful colleagues and have a relationship with them. Know them well enough that if you're faced with something that is controversial, something that you are charged with building a policy within your program, that you can reach out to them and rely on their seniority, rely on that experience that they have brought to the profession.
Looking back at your career, at Sebastian River, can you think of an example where that handbook really saved the day? As you're talking about, you're in that meeting with the parent. Anything jump out at you?
Sure. Had a young man that was dismissed from the boys basketball team. And at a home game, I saw him placing bets against our team. And I walked over to him and I said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "Oh, we're just having some fun." I said, "Well, you're betting. I'm observing it." And he looked at me, and I'll never forget this as long as I live. He said, "Coach Stutzke," he says, "there's nothing in your handbook about gambling or betting. I've read that handbook, and there's nothing in there that says we can't do this." I said, "Okay, point well taken." Of course, within a 2-week period of time, there was an amendment to the handbook that spoke specifically to ever placing any form of monetary bet against your team or any other team on the campus. Period, exclamation point. And of course, the principal thought, who would have ever thought we would have to have a rule in place? But we do. Um, one other one other item that came to mind was the first year we were open, a young man was not awarded a varsity letter in football. After the football banquet, the mother came up to me and she said, "My son didn't get a varsity letter." I said, "Well, that would be a question for the head coach because he or she sets the criteria for the award of the varsity letter." She said, "Well, I haven't been able to talk with him." I said, "Well, he's right over here." I called him over. I said, "Coach," I said, "can you explain what took place?" And he did. He turned to me and she said, "Well, I'd like very much to buy a varsity letter." I said, "Man, we don't sell varsity letters here." She said, "Well, I'm going to go down to the local sporting goods store. I'll buy it there." I said, "Ma'am," I said, "they don't sell varsity letters there." She said, "Well, in your athletic handbook, you don't have the criteria to earn the varsity letter." Once again, a perfect example. We went right into that handbook, and the start of our second year, that criteria was there, specifically noting that the coach and the coaching staff will determine the award of the varsity letter. That it's not a school board, it's not a principal, it's not an athletic director that picks them. It's the coach and his coaching staff.
Yeah, and again, I think over the years since that event that you described, I think athletic directors have done a pretty good job of making sure phrases and content to that extent are in their handbooks, and it's timely. And again, for our listeners, we're recording this in October, but this coming December at the national conference, the NADC, one of the new LTI courses, brand new LTI courses, it's on writing your handbook. So if you haven't already registered for the conference and that particular LTI course, I think it's going to be standing room only. Okay. Mike, again, great stuff. We're not done yet. We're coming back with some more. And for our listeners, we hope you're going to stay with us. This is the Educational AD Podcast. We want to say thanks to our friends at Snap Mobile for their support of the podcast. Go to snapraise.com. That's the website, snapraise.com. Check out their entire suite of platforms that are going to help you do your job better. If you're looking for a fundraising platform, stop right here. SnapRaise is hands down the best one available. We used it at our school with great success. The coaches loved it, the parents loved it, and what's more, it works. They even have a program where they will send you your funding before you actually do your fundraiser. Nobody else does that, but there's a lot more. You'll find it all at snapraise.com. We also want to say thanks to Huddle. Go to huddle.com and change the way you see the game. As a football coach, I used Huddle for years, but when I became an athletic director, I made sure that our school was a Huddle school, and our coaches just loved the tools that Huddle provided that allowed them to coach our kids at their highest level. Go to huddle.com, see why we believe in sports and teams believe in Huddle. Join the 8 million users and turn your school into a Huddle school. That's huddle.com. Hey, welcome back, everyone, to the Educational AD Podcast. Michael, in your time in Florida, you spoke a number of times. I had the pleasure of hearing you present on best practices to avoid a hazing incident at your school. Can you share a little bit with our listeners about, how they can try to avoid having to deal with this at their school?
Certainly. First of all, we always try as athletic administrators to hire the best people to take on the awesome responsibility of coaching our teams. And you like to think that you have the right people in place. So, on the topic of hazing, which was probably one of the most difficult times in my career, was dealing with a hazing incident back in 2008. It was with in one of our programs. It splintered the community. Very emotional situation for all parties: victim, the perpetrators, the school, the district, and like I said, the community. What did we learn from it? We all know that hazing, unfortunately, still prevails in our society. What motivates young people to do some of the things that they do has left the best athletic administrators scratching their head and saying, how did this happen on my watch? If you have a coach that you are concerned about as far as they're following the responsibilities within your department and reporting things to you, then you should remove that coach. You cannot afford, in the litigious society that you're part of, to have coaches that are not following the directives that you set as the athletic administrator and the rules that you have in your school district and your athletic handbooks. If they're not willing to follow those rules and regulations, and I'm speaking specifically of supervision, you don't want them as a coach. I don't care how good they are, because it takes that one incident that can take all of the good things that have happened within your program and put a very unfortunate spotlight on all of the wonderful things that have taken place, all of the good coaches that you have, and the fine student athletes that attend your school, because it becomes a black mark on your program. And it will take years to get out from underneath it. So, what are some of the things we can do as athletic administrators? Make sure that your coaches understand that they are responsible for their student athletes from the moment that that practice starts until the last student athlete has left the campus. We cannot afford in today's society to leave teenagers alone, period, because they will find a way to get in trouble, and sometimes in the very worst ways. Failure to instruct your assistant coaches to be responsible in monitoring, supervising your student athletes is opening a Pandora box for trouble. So I think it is extremely important that parents understand and student athletes understand in the beginning of a season that any form of hazing is unacceptable. It is illegal. It is, in many ways, when carried to an extreme, immoral, and it will not be tolerated by your program. And anyone who observes it, who does not report it, might as well be part of the problem of the act itself. Because the important thing is that if something does happen, it's reported immediately to the athletic administrator, who in turn has an obligation to take it immediately to the school principal and law enforcement if necessary to get in front of the problem. Don't let it fester. Don't give your coaches the rope to make decisions on their own, which will negatively impact the school and the community. It must be reported and dealt with immediately. And there must be consequences for the coach, the coaching staff, the perpetrators, and in some instances, there have been programs that have dissolved for that season. And student athletes need to know in the beginning of their season that if that behavior exists, you jeopardize the program for everybody for that season. And if somebody goes, well, what's the big deal? Well, if you're playing on a team and you have potential for a scholarship, you may lose the opportunity to show how good of an athlete you are because your program has been shut down.
Yeah, again, it's one of those things that an athletic director never wants to have to deal with. But as you mentioned, one of the keys is hiring great people, hiring them from the beginning, letting them know, this is how we roll. These are our standards. And then you hit on, I think it's one of the easiest ways to prevent it, but seems to be the most frequent way that hazing occurs is that the coach just doesn't supervise that locker room before or after practice. And I remember having conversations, with multiple coaches saying, hey, do you like to coach? Oh, yeah, I do. Okay, well, then you're going to supervise the locker room, because if you don't, you're not going to be coaching for us. And it just, for some of them, it had to get to that level that, hey, this is part of your job for them to, finally supervise that locker room, because as you mentioned, kids are going to be kids. Wow. Okay. Thanks so much for sharing with that. I wish we had another hour to spend, but we're not done yet. We always wrap things up with the athletic director's toolbox. Now, you certainly know your way around the world of athletics. Once again, for our listeners, Michael's a Hall of Fame athletic director here in Florida. But in just a minute, I'm going to challenge you to send out a brand new athletic director on their very first job, but I'm only going to let you put 3 things in their toolbox. So let's take our final break. We're going to hear from Athletic Surveys, who sponsored the toolbox segment. When we come back, we're going to find out what Michael Stutzke is going to put into his new athletic director toolbox. Please stay with us. We want to thank Athletic Surveys for sponsoring the AD Toolbox segment of the podcast. Athletic Surveys are a quick, easy, and an affordable way for you to collect comprehensive data that allows you to evaluate and improve your entire program. Athletic directors already hear back from the complainers, that 2% that want to gripe about everything. Athletic Surveys will connect you with that 2%, but they'll also connect you with the 98% that really support your program. And that's a tremendously valuable tool to have when you're talking with that frustrated parent or your principal or even your school board. Go to athleticsurveys.com. They're going to create a custom survey that will let you take the pulse of your parents and your student athletes. That's athleticsurveys.com. Well, it's that time of the podcast. We have been visiting with a Hall of Fame athletic director, Michael Stutzke, certified master athletic administrator, longtime AD here in Florida. But right now I'm going to challenge him to send out a brand new AD on their very first job, but I'm only going to let him put 3 things in the toolbox. So, Michael, what 3 items are going to go into your new athletic director toolbox?
I think that every athletic director should have an emergency plan of action for the use of their facilities, and that includes their indoor facilities. What do you do when you're faced with a catastrophic event? So I think that that's important to have that in the toolbox. I think the other is knowing your coaching staff. You may be inheriting a coaching staff. Get to know them. These are the individuals that are in the front lines. I always shared with coaches that they were the captain of their ship. My job is if they were taking on water to bring them back to port, bail them out, and send them back out. If I had to do that more than one time, I needed to find a new captain. So I think knowing your coaching staff is very important. Last but not least, never be afraid to ask questions of your administration and what their expectation is. Many principals today do not have athletic backgrounds, and they rely on the athletic administrator. Find out what they want out of the program and detail your program around that. Because after all, at the end of the day, that's who you report to. And as I mentioned earlier, I think it is extremely important to have a handbook that is truly the roadmap for your athletic program.
Yeah, you snuck in a 4th one, but what a great tool to put in there, that handbook. As you and I talked about, it's a great way to preventively make sure you're not going to have to deal with something down the road. Great stuff. Michael, thanks again for sharing with our listeners. I'm going to ask one more time. If one of them wanted to reach out and pick your brain, and listeners, you got a tremendous resource right here. What's the best way that they can get a hold of you?
Best way would be email. The email address is gladwin54@gmail.com. I'm going to spell Gladwin. G is in golf, L is in Lima, A is in Alpha, D is in Delta, W is in Whiskey, Y is in Yankee, N is in November, E is in Echo, 54@gmail.com.
Michael Stutzke, thanks again for spending some time with us, and all the best. Hopefully we're going to be able to see you at the national conference, or maybe even at the FIAAA conference in May.
Most definitely. Thank you very much for having me, Jay. Greatly appreciate it.
We are very honored that you would come on. For our listeners, we appreciate you listening, and we upload the Zoom recordings of these interviews to the Educational AD Podcast YouTube channel. Again, we appreciate your support. Come back next time for another great interview, and just about every day for new content on the Educational AD Podcast. We'll see you next time.